We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, Wednesday, June 10th, 2026. And today we're going to get into some election drama in Alaska. Donald Trump hates women, according to the Washington Post. Federal judges suddenly, miraculously understand the difference between a tax and a fee. We have a new FBI counterterrorism entrapment playbook case to dig into. And finally, the Department of Justice is okay with defamation as long as it comes from Congress. So let's get after it. As I was preparing today, I was trying to figure out the plumb line of the stories, and it just seemed to me that there's always something under the surface. And I wanted to actually start off with something that was going to be a little bit of light reading, maybe have our dessert first. We're always eating our peas. I mean, let's have some pie, let's have some ice cream. And then, as I'm wont to do, I just went down a rabbit hole and started digging deeper and deeper and pulled something that is pretty important out of an otherwise kind of a funny story. So I want to actually begin with the Alaska story, because this is trolling at its best, but it could actually have some massive consequences in the balance of power at the United States Senate. This comes from The Independent. Headline: Alaska Senate candidate under investigation over alleged voter confusion scheme. So there's a Republican senator in Alaska. His name is Dan Sullivan. He is running for re-election, and he faces a field of 15 competitors. One of them is named Dan Sullivan. The senator, the actual Dan Sullivan senator, told reporters in Washington that he thinks the appearance on the state's primary ballot of another Republican with the same name is a dirty political trick coordinated by Democrats on behalf of his chief rival, who is a former U.S. representative. Her name is Mary Peltola. State election officials certified that Dan J. Sullivan, not the senator, from Southeast Alaska fishing community in Petersburg, he is one of the candidates in the Senate race. He has not been able to be reached, and it did not appear that he even registered with the Federal Election Commission. So I think the good senator's suspicions might be a little bit warranted. I also want to laugh because this is the exact plot of The Distinguished Gentleman, the Eddie Murphy movie from like 35 years ago. I think his name in the movie is Thomas Jefferson Johnson, and there's this old white dude who's running for re-election and kind of keels over and dies, or I forget the setup for it. But his name is Jeff Johnson. So he says, oh, I'll just drop my first name and I'll go with Jefferson Johnson, Jeff for short. I'm Jeff Johnson. And then the name recognition comes in. And all of a sudden, this con artist, this scammer gets elected. And what we really find out, the lesson of the movie is that the true con artists are the people who are elected into our Article 1 branch of government. They're really running the long con. They're really the ones who are lining their pockets. It seems like not much has changed over the last 35 years, which would be about, 6 terms in the Senate, which I think we have a few of them there who have been there that long. But this guy, Dan Sullivan, he's got a good case. Is this dirty tricks? Is it legal? And how is this dirty trick even possible in Alaska? And that's really when I went down the rabbit hole, because Alaska and Maine are two states that are running at statewide elections this ranked choice voting scheme that goes on, which on its face sounds kind of reasonable, sounds like something that, hey, maybe it could be a way that we could bring about a more democratic process. Everybody could have their voices heard, because if you don't like the R or the D, you're kind of up a creek. You're going to vote for a third party. That's throwing your vote away. Really, that's what the long-term criticism of it is. Oh, really? You're going to vote for the Libertarian or the Green Party or whatever sort of non-major party? Effectively, your voice isn't heard. So in theory, what ranked choice voting is supposed to do is you rank the guy who you like first. If you want to have the protest vote, you can go ahead and have the protest vote. But if nobody gets the majority, nobody gets 50% plus one in the vote, Then we're going to toss out the last place person. And then the second place person for those votes that get thrown out, they get a vote. The problem is, well, there are lots of problems. It kind of gives double and triple and quadruple, however many it requires, how many times you're going to have to drop people off the list. It kind of gives bonus votes to people who chose losers, which is not really democratic because one man, one vote is kind of thrown out. Now, there's another element to it that actually played out in Alaska a few years ago, which is worth going into. But I have a joining piece that I want to throw out here. This one comes from the FGA.org. Ranked choice voting, a partisan plot to engineer election results. So, rather than just voting for their favorite candidate, voters must vote for all candidates to ensure that their ballots are counted and not trashed, which I didn't know. I knew a little bit about the way that this works in ranked choice voting. But in Alaska, for instance, 4 people out of those 15 who are running to become the senator, 4 of them are going to make it to the ballot for the general election, the top 4. Well, we run one time through, nobody gets to 50%, then we drop off the 4th place person. And then all of the people who voted for the 4th place person, their second choice, whoever that is, those votes get allocated to the remaining 3. And then we count them again. And if nobody wins, then we'll drop off the 3rd place person because we're down to a pool of 3. And effectively, you will get to a place in the final 2, if you have to go that far, where somebody gets the majority vote. But I didn't know that there's a whole thing called exhausted ballots. I mean, let's say that there's a candidate running who you will never, ever mark a ballot for. Just pick a person, pick a party, whatever it is, whoever offends your sensibilities so badly that no matter what, even in last place, you will not mark a ballot for that person. I can understand that. I mean, under no circumstances would I ever mark a ballot for Jim spelled with a G Jordan. He's a piece of trash. I don't care. I wouldn't even put him last place. He doesn't earn that from me. But if ranked choice voting is out there and I'm in the district and Jim Jordan's on the ballot and I fail to put him in there, then my ballot gets thrown in the trash because it's been exhausted. I didn't fill it out. It's an incomplete ballot. That's the way that the processes work. And this actually played out a couple years ago because there was this whole special election that happened in Alaska, where Dan Sullivan is currently dealing with all the drama. That was a special election. Sarah Palin got involved. There was 1 Democrat and 2 Republicans. It was a special election for the congressional seat. They get 1 representative out of Alaska. They just don't have that many people there. So 1 congressperson comes from Alaska. 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat who are running for it. And there was concern at the time. Well, the Republicans, they're going to split the ticket. They're going to split the vote, and the Democrats going to run right up the middle and win. And it's kind of what happened, except the Democrat didn't get the majority of the vote, didn't get that 50% plus 1. So we're in ranked choice voting. So whoever was thrown out 3rd, because it was a 3-person race, those votes should get allocated to the remaining 2 candidates, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. I think Sarah Palin was a Republican in that case. That happens. But over 11,000 people who voted refused to put a last place person on their ballot. Their ballots were exhausted and thrown in the trash. And as a result of that, the Democrat got 50% plus 1, a little bit more than that, of the actual votes that were counted and was elected to become the representative for the state of Alaska. Now, who was that person? Oh, that's right. It was the same person who's running against Dan Sullivan right now, Mary Peltola. So trying to re-rack and run some dirty tricks, as it appears. If you dig a little bit deeper, it kind of reminds you of an Eddie Murphy comedy, but also is going to have some significant consequences if this thing actually winds up going all the way. And we don't know what the future holds, but at the very least, it is an interesting story, something to keep your eye on. And if you hail from Alaska and you are deprived of the opportunity to have the great Dan Sullivan represent you, I mean, don't cry too much, because I looked at his ranking from the Heritage Action, and they're hardly far right, but that's the best I could come up with. Heritage was integral in the Project 2025, and you can see that Dan Sullivan's lifetime score, according to them, is 68%. So barely anything resembling a conservative out of Alaska. Okay, now let's get into some other stuff that I want to see that's more than meeting the eye. And I want to go to the Washington Post for this one because I saw the story and it's an opportunity for one of these leftist rags, Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, to attempt to dunk on the president of the United States because they view him as mean, orange, and literally Hitler. But if you actually have the gumption to read through the just trash that they put out there, you find out a lot more about the Washington Post than anything else in this one. So it's all about women who are members of the president's cabinet and the administration in general, principals and leaders within the presidential administration. The headline reads, "In Trump's second term, fewer seats for women at the table because he's mean, orange, literally Hitler, and he hates women," per the Washington Post. So WAPO reviewed a whole bunch of data, and it shows that Donald Trump has selected fewer women to serve in senior roles than during the same period during his first term. There's also been a lot of turnover amongst women in the cabinet, and they've all been replaced by men, which means he hates women, he's a misogynist, and we should all hate him. The actual data from WAPO says 14.53% of all nominees coming from Donald Trump are female. Joe Biden, on the other hand, because he was pure as a driven snow, he was fantastic and fabulous. 52.5% of his nominees were women. So I guess he was 4x better than Donald Trump in the eyes of Washington Post. Content of character be damned. All that matters is what's dangling between your legs. But now to the more than meets the eye. Among Donald Trump's presidential predecessors, only Joe Biden successfully nominated more women to serve in his cabinet towards the start of his presidency. So, other than Joe Biden, who was not sentient, I don't even think we can debate that anymore. The guy had pudding for brains. He was the auto pen administration, the human Roomba, not in charge of his faculties at any point during his administration, during which they nominated 52% of the people were female, and I don't think all of them got through. I wound up being less than half of the Senate appointees or the people that had to matriculate through the Senate process and confirmation wound up being female, but somewhere close to parity, 50-50 roughly. But other than Joe Biden, Donald Trump's actually nominated the most. So he's second place. Like out of 47 administrations, he's the second, but mean, orange, literally Hitler, and he hates women. And it gets worse, actually, for the Washington Post. Again, this piece, in Trump's second term, fewer seats for women at the table. Nearly a year and a half into Donald Trump's second term, every departure from his cabinet has been a woman, and more female cabinet and cabinet level officials have left their positions during this term than at this point in any previous presidential administration. So, a little bit of turmoil. They're having some problems. Who are the gigantic names, the largest principals, the most important senior executives who have departed from Donald Trump Part 2, number 47? Pam Bondi, who was garbage as an attorney general, right? Wasn't the Washington Post giving her a hard time for that little thing called Epstein? Remember, the files are on my desk. Oops, sorry. Oh, I'll give it to some influencers. But that didn't happen. Maybe we'll just close this whole thing out over a July 4th weekend during some deadly flooding in Texas on a Sunday night when nobody's paying attention. Whoops. Now we've lost the opportunity to say ongoing investigation. I'm sorry, we can't turn that over. And then we have to fight with the Congress on the Epstein Transparency Act and then find ourselves in conflict with that law that was passed on through with, I believe, only one nay vote through both houses of Congress and signed immediately by the President of the United States in order to turn over that information. And then Pam Bondi's defense is the Dow's at 50,000. So she's garbage and she got fired and replaced with the lifetime Democrat and Todd Blanche. That's a problem for Washington Post. Okay. Well, that's one. How about Lori Chavez DeRemer? She was the Secretary of Labor who was involved in an extramarital affair with somebody on her protective detail and arranging for the plane to fly her around to visit with her friends and family on the American taxpayers' dime. And then Kristi Noem, who laundered $250 million to her friends so they could run a advertising scheme to hype her up so that she could run for president in 2028. So I guess the Washington Post would prefer corrupt women over a man, which doesn't really speak very well about the Washington Post. And finally, what they say is that 5% of Republicans have a really deep seated desire. I mean, it is, how do they phrase it? Extremely or very important to 5% of Republicans that they witness within their lifetimes a woman be elected president of the United States. 31%, 6x of Democrats say the exact same thing. Extremely, very important that they witness a woman get sworn in as president of the United States. So, is Washington Post because democracy dies in darkness, non-bias, down the middle, big J journalism? Because they're harping on this so much, are you admitting that it's extremely and very important to you to argue on behalf of the fairer sex becoming the commander in chief of the United States? Oh, so now you've fully admitted openly that you have a political persuasion here? You're no longer going to even pull the veil down and say, "Oh no, we're just asking questions here." Well, your questions have resulted in being hoisted by your own petard. You're a leftist communist rag. And in fact, you've actually admitted that you would prefer a corrupt administration or corrupt and effective rather than somebody who's competent but just happens to have male genitalia dangling between their legs. Hard hitting journalism over from the Washington Post, which continued on because they wanted to take another opportunity to hit on the Trump administration. And this one is more about Maha. It's about alcohol consumption. So let's pivot over to this one. Headline: What a study at odds with Trump officials' health guidance found on alcohol limits. So, this is a study where moderate drinking increases the risk of early death and diseases like cancer, heart disease, liver disease, and provides no net positive health benefit. The study recommends that the USDA update its guidance to reflect a 1 drink a day limit. So these authors for this study conducted all their different polling and research, and I'm sure there was Bunsen burners involved. Probably a pretty healthy portion of money that was stolen. I mean, tax from the American people, so they could have a funded study to learn things that we already know that drinking to excess is really bad for your health. You know, that's how it is. So the study says, USDA, we recommend, because we're the authorities, we've got the white lab coats, we've got the goggles on, the Bunsen burners, maybe a stethoscope. So trust the science. We recommend that the drink recommendation coming from the government should be 1 drink per day maximum, because it's up to the government in the pesky, dusty documents on the back of the Declaration of Independence in invisible ink to make recommendations to you about your health and what sort of spirits that you should imbibe. Okay. That's the recommendation. But because Donald Trump and his administration and the principals within his administration, probably men, are mean, orange, and literally Hitler, they didn't do exactly what the researchers told them that they had to do. What did they do? Did they tell everybody to go on a binge drinking spree? Play beer pong with your 9-year-old at night before bed? Nope. The federal government pulled back on its alcohol messaging in January. It released its new dietary guidelines, cautioning people to, quote, consume less alcohol for better overall health, unquote. So drink less was a recommendation, but they didn't say exactly what the researchers at the Washington Post really mega MAGA Doppler likes, because they're saying something other than what the administration has put out there, which is pretty consistent with what the researchers were saying to begin with, but it wasn't exact. It's a problem. They should have said 1 drink per day. We need to know the exact amount that is allowable by your government that tells you everything that you have to do, because that's the perspective of the Washington Post. All good things come from the government, like good communists believe. Okay. A little bit of a grab bag today, but I do want to actually touch on this next one because it came out a couple days ago. It's worth digging into because we had a gigantic moment of revelation from the courts, from our rulers in black robes, guys. They finally, at the federal level, have grasped that there is a difference between taxes and fees. Obamacare? Anybody? Anybody? No, just just immigration stuff. So from Reuters, headline: Trump's 100,000 H-1B visa fee is unlawful. U.S. judge rules. This judge, his name is Leo Sorokin. He struck down the $100,000 fee from Donald Trump that he imposed on new H-1B visas for highly skilled foreign workers. Now, as a background, if you don't remember, this fee was supposed to incentivize companies, instead of hiring foreign workers, to hire Americans. Because I guess the overall number, the breakdown is, if you hire a foreign worker who doesn't have to take as much money because they're from another country and they're used to a lower standard of living, plus, you look into the past and they were getting cheaper loans for houses, so they weren't going to have to compete on an even playing field with the American people. And a lot of these guys double up, triple up, quadruple up, so their living expenses are much less than Americans. They're willing to accept less. So you have savings from a company. They'll say, hey, we'll just hire a foreigner and we'll claim that they're highly skilled, even though they're just operating Microsoft Windows and a telephone, which you could do. So the Trump administration said, hey, foreigners are taking Americans' jobs. If you want to bring in a foreigner, you have to pay $100,000. Now, the companies computed that it would take them about 6 years to recoup $100,000. Over a course of 6 years, they wound up paying the foreigner about 100 grand less than an American. So are you willing to take that long-term investment? Are you willing to risk that this person that you bring over from a foreign country is going to stay with you for more than 6 years, particularly if it's in tech? I mean, tech's innovation, it's moving so fast, it's probably not worth it. So the incentive was hire an American. We're going to artificially increase the amount you have to pay a foreign worker, kind of like a tariff. And the judge in this case kind of leaned on that logic and said that the tariff's not legal, not constitutional. And similarly, in this case, this $100,000 fee is not allowable. The administration argued the fee constituted lawful monetary penalties that the president is authorized to impose under federal immigration law. So he has the power to restrict the entry of certain foreign nationals. But the judge here concluded the fee was not a penalty, but instead it was a tax. I mentioned Obamacare. Remember that whole thing where John Roberts was going to save us? It was actually part of his election strategy, John Roberts, to get Mitt Romney elected president so that we could finally undo Obamacare. We're going to repeal it, root and branch. And then even 4 years later, when the Republicans got the White House and both houses within Congress, they couldn't even get that done. But to Obamacare, there was this fee/tax we didn't know about having health insurance, right? They said, well, Obama argued it was a fee. It was a fee attached. And the counter argument to that, when they went to the Supreme Court, was, no, it's not a fee. No, you can't do that. You can't levy this fee. Kind of like the judge argued exactly here. You can't levy a fee. But in that case, the Supreme Court said, no, it's not a fee. It's actually a tax, even though it doesn't say tax in the law itself. We will rewrite the law so it says tax, and the government can levy a tax. Well, at the very least now, it appears that the federal jurisprudence has prevailed. Logic exists. Fees and taxes are different, but if it's for the benefit of the American people, we will construe the semantics in a way that goes against their interests. And if it's in favor of foreigners getting ahead of Americans, then we will manipulate the semantics so that it benefits the foreigners. So America last, as always. The status quo is forever. All right, I want to pivot over and give some time to this FBI entrapment case. But guys, before we do, I want to remind you, if you haven't already, please do on Rumble, YouTube, give us the like and the thumbs up and the follows, the subscribes, all those things. Very helpful for us to trick the algorithm into boosting us every single day, try to grow out our fan base here on the American Radical Podcast every weekday, noontime at AmRadPod. And if you happen to miss us, or you just want to double up, maybe I said something and you want to share it with somebody, encourage you all to head on over to Spotify, again, at AmRadPod. The episode will go there around 1 o'clock Eastern time, and I will schedule the commercial to run right about now. And we can actually now get into the latest FBI entrapment. It only took them 2 days, guys. We did the deep dive on Monday about the two from California, the one from Kansas, who were on the hook for over a year. And I found another one, jumped right off the page at me like it always does. And I got it from social media, from the Twitter account at the FBI. Let's deep dive this one, guys. Case update from FBI Newark. Passaic man charged with attempting to provide material support to ISIS. From approximately December 2025 to June 2026, Mohammed Sagha, Gurga, participated in one or more online chat groups wherein supporters of the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS, discussed, among other things, potential attacks on targets within the United States, including places of worship. The reason I read that is that he's charged with attempting to provide material support to ISIS, and all the FBI saw fit in their social media post was to say that he was in a chat room talking to people who were sympathetic to ISIS. So there's a little bit of a disconnection there. There must be more than meets the eye. I mean, surely he did something that was radical and it was illegal and it was an attempt to cause harm to American citizens, because the FBI is pure as a driven snow, like Joe Biden. Right? Well, no. This is a playbook case, guys. I actually got the charging document. We'll work our way through it. And as a refresher, what is the playbook? We find a vulnerable person. By we, the FBI. Find a vulnerable person, low intelligence, lonely, emotionally disturbed, downtrodden, financially indigent, whatever it is. Increasingly online. Very easy to do. You just go into a chat room and say if there's any retards in here saying some things that are inflammatory. And then once you identify them, you provide them the opportunity to do their worst ideas. How do you do that? Well, you groom them. Days, weeks, months, years. You use a confidential human source, CHS, maybe an undercover employee, UCE, or an online covert employee, OCE, and then you groom that vulnerable person to do their worst thing, or at least agree to do their worst ideas for the exact amount of money that they happen to have in their bank account, because the FBI already knows that they already subpoena those records. And then once they agree to do the thing that they were never predisposed to do or capable of even doing, but for the FBI getting involved to begin with, that's when you hit them. That's when you throw the flashbang, throw the fat handcuffs on them, and claim that they attempted to provide material support to terrorism. Attempted. Didn't, but attempted. So here is the criminal complaint, which is out of the District of New Jersey. It is the United States of America versus Mohammed Sagha. And I don't want to mispronounce this dude's name. So I'm going to have to, put in something different. Now, we did Mo, Larry, and Curly, the Three Stooges, on Monday. So I was thinking of the crash dummies from those commercials in the 80s and 90s. One of them was named Vince. So we'll call Mohammed Vince, just so we can be a more Americanized version as we're digging into all the entrapment that went on here. So work your way through it. I'll throw it up on the screen. The link is in the notes for today, guys, but I will pull out the actual names of the paragraphs or the numbers associated with them for your reference. So let's begin with the summary for probable cause. This is only like a 9-page document, and most of it is in template form, right? Like what is ISIS? And who am I? The actual specifics. There's actually images in here too that aren't really that important. So 9-page document, paragraph 5. Between at least in or around December 2025 through present, so December of last year to today, the defendant, Vince, he participated in one or more chat groups in an online social media platform where ISIS supporters discussed things like potential attacks on targets within the United States. So it sounds like Vince is having some conversations with some bad people. Now, are you allowed to have uncomfortable conversations in this country? Yes, you are. Are you allowed to plot some sort of violent attack? No. So we need to actually dig a little bit deeper. And I forgot, I got to issue my land acknowledgement and my throat clearing here. Vince is a dirtbag. I don't want to hang out with him. I wouldn't want him looking after my kids. But Vince is also a retard, like all vulnerable people, like all the playbook victims of the FBI. So key in on the dates. Paragraph 5 digs into between December of last year and today, Vince is messing around on social media. Paragraph 6, beginning in October of 2025 and continuing through June 1st of 2026 of this year, a confidential human source communicated with Vince through the platform. Okay, that doesn't make sense at all. We found out from paragraph 5 that Vince was messing around on the social media platform beginning in December. But then the next paragraph, they tell you that the confidential human source was communicating in October on the social media site. Oh, that's because the confidential human source was just trolling the internet to find vulnerable people. That tracks perfectly. We're still on par with the exact playbook that we see all the time. Confidential human source just out there trying to get paid. They don't get paid unless they give the red meat to the FBI. Give them the targets that they want so that they can spring the mousetrap and go in front of Congress and brag about just how many terrorists they pulled off the streets. And it's better to work smarter than work harder. Just troll the internet, see what people are saying, gauge their intelligence level. We have now given away that the confidential human source, who was in the employ of the FBI, not a W-2 employee, but getting cash nonetheless, money that's stolen, I mean tax from you, and then handed out to this person to go on the internet and find fresh meat for the FBI. So predated Vince's involvement in the social media site. All right, we've established it. So Vince told the confidential human source that Vince had become familiar with ISIS and its doctrine by reading about it online. Not illegal to read about ISIS because that's what FBI agents do all the time. All right. Paragraph 8. Throughout his communications with Vince, the confidential human source held himself out to be an ISIS member because Vince is retarded. He thinks ISIS is cool. Now we have an informant who's saying, hey, I'm an ISIS fighter. I'll be your only friend in the world. Paragraph 9, January of this year, the confidential human source learned that Vince was planning to leave New Jersey for Canada and make his way to either Syria or Nigeria, neither of which is connected to each other. He doesn't know where ISIS is. He hasn't seen a map, probably doesn't understand what a globe is. Paragraph 10, in or around February 2026. The FBI learned that Vince planned to travel to Canada to meet up with another ISIS supporter who Vince met on the platform. Now we're up to paragraph 11. This is page 6 of the document. February 25th, 2026. We've now been in the contact of the FBI for 3 months. Confidential human source and Vince participated in a voice call with one or more other individuals where they discuss things like Vince's plan to travel to Canada. He still has a plan. He's still going to go to America's Hat, guys, so he can go to either Syria or Nigeria, but he doesn't know because he's a retard. Vince also said in sum and substance that he had discussed with individual one the fact that Vince had a contact in Syria. From context, this appears to be a reference to the confidential human source. That's very confusing language, as most of these court documents are. But essentially, Vince, the informant, and one other dude got on a call. And during the conversation, Vince told this other person who purports to be an enthusiast of ISIS, I know somebody in Syria. Because Vince thinks that the human source who was on the call with him is an ISIS fighter in Syria. So Vince doesn't know anybody in Syria. He doesn't know where Syria is. He thinks it's adjoining with Nigeria. But that's what's represented here. So now he's telling somebody else who's likely on the hook as well of another playbook case by the FBI. I know somebody that can hook us up to become fighters with ISIS. All we have to do is travel to America's Hat, which is Canada. Now we go to paragraph 13. Between or about March 2nd and March 4th, the confidential human source sent Vince a photo that depicted him as an ISIS fighter. So we're continuing to groom. Also, the confidential human source communicated with Vince and asked him to renew his pledge to ISIS. So the source, the confidential human source, who was being paid by the FBI, his handler, the agent in charge of this case, said, hey, Go ping him, see if he'll double down on his pledge to ISIS. We need to make sure that it's fresh, that he actually has that. So this dude, Vince, is just kind of like bebopping along. He's not making any pledges to ISIS, but for the suggestion of the only friend in the world that he has who claims to be an ISIS fighter and sends him a picture of himself, which is just a Getty image that he pulled off of Google. And then the FBI still can't prove that he does the pledge. In the charging document, they say there's no evidence that he actually did the pledge. But we know that a lot of times we are pretty sure that these guys do pledges to ISIS. So trust us, he probably did it. That's effectively what they argue here. No evidence. They actually say there's no evidence he did the pledge, and they included it in there. So that's not derogatory information. If anything, it's exculpatory. But because we exist in this weird timeline where the FBI and the Department of Justice presumes guilt rather than innocence, you are always guilty, no presumption of innocence. You are always intending on doing the terrorism. That is actually a demerit. Not having any proof that the guy did something wrong still implies he did something wrong. Back again. Now we can go to paragraph 14, page 5 of the document, March 9th. We're up, guys, now over 4 months that we've been in touch. The confidential human source has been looking for 6, but 4 months of sustained contact between the confidential human source, i.e. the FBI, and Vince, our would-be terrorist. March 9th. Vince left his residence in New Jersey with plans to travel to Canada. However, he was unable to put his plan into action and he went home. So he was trying to go to Canada, we think. No proof, nothing actually offered here. Not like he has a plane ticket that's got a screenshot and we say, oh, he just didn't make it. Now, even if he did, maybe he thought differently. All we know is he left his house in New Jersey because the FBI said he intended to go to Canada and then didn't get it done. Probably because he's too retarded to go north. He probably drove east. But we know now that he didn't go to Canada, and we know that there's no evidence that he actually did a pledge to ISIS. But he's still a subject of a counterterrorism investigation of the FBI, but the FBI is starting to panic. They're starting to be like, oh, we've invested a bunch of time in this guy. We've paid this source. It's been at least 4 months. We got to get our pound of flesh, which is how things can proceed to where they go in paragraph 15. And this is where we get into the providing material support to terrorism, which there was an interesting appellate court decision on recently that said you can't provide yourself as material support to a terrorist organization that has no idea you exist, which would be a problem. But the FBI is going to proceed on because this is exactly what they do with their playbook. Paragraph 15, page 7 of the charging document. On or about May 31st, a full 6 months into this thing, guys, Vince and the confidential human source exchanged voice and text messages. The confidential human source discussed a virtual private network, or a VPN, and they wanted to get one for the confidential human source and his brothers. So the source for the FBI groomed this guy, Vince, and said, what would be awesome is if somebody would buy us a VPN. And Vince purchases the VPN. So it's a VPN that can be used by up to 5 brothers, according to the affidavit, where now the FBI and the Department of Justice will articulate that Vince has provided material support to terrorism by buying a VPN at the suggestion of the government, which groomed him for 6 months to do anything that they possibly could get him to do, and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't even travel. He wouldn't even say a pledge. Not a pledge of allegiance, but we got him to buy a VPN, and that's material support to terrorism, even though the VPN was never available to ISIS, even though Vince has never been in contact with ISIS. And that's where the last paragraph here of this charging document is the most rich. It is on page 9, the final page, and I will just read it in its full, just so you get an idea of how diabolical and evil and malevolent the agents of the FBI and the Department of Justice truly are. Paragraph 24. Based on my training and experience, had Vince been communicating with an actual ISIS member and not a confidential human source, he would have provided members of a terrorist organization with a tool capable of enhancing their operational security and ability to communicate and operate online with reduced risk of identification, thereby facilitating their planned acts of terrorism. So that's enough. Do you know how many qualifiers are in that? I'm going to have to go back. Well, based on your training experience, which we're just taking at face value, it's garbage training and experience, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on that one. Had Vince 1, actual ISIS 2, would have 3, and capable of enhancing 4. 4 qualifiers in one paragraph that is 1 sentence long. That is the FBI. That is the playbook. This guy was never in touch with a terrorist organization. He was never planning or plotting to do anything. And yet he was a vulnerable person. And the FBI was more than happy to go after him and more than happy to take advantage of his stupidity so that they could do this Twitter post. Again, case update. From approximately December 2025 to June 2026, Mohammed Sagha participated in one or more online group chats wherein supporters of the Islamic State discussed, among other things, potential attacks on targets. I didn't even catch it. Supporters of the Islamic State discussed, not even him, guys, not even him, people in the chat room that were not him. He was just more retarded than them. There's always more than meets the eye with this stuff. All right. I've got one more that I want to get to, which also offended my sensibilities because it's the Department of Justice. And they are arguing that I guess defamation doesn't apply to our elected betters because we do have a 2-tiered system of justice. You know, Pam Bondi, she failed and flubbed on Epstein, which is the ultimate question. Is there a 2-tiered system? And that basically gave us the affirmation that we needed that, yes, that's true. But it does also help to have duplicate evidence, or we can double down on it. So first, the background from National Review, and it's about a year or so old story for those who actually missed it. It's about Matt Taibbi. He's a reporter. He runs his own Substack called The Racket. I've talked to Matt multiple times. He actually came down to my house and interviewed me at length, like 5-6 hours long. Really nice guy, really buttoned up journalist, only interested in the facts. If politically, I think he'd be honest enough to say that he's left of center, but that doesn't matter to him. And he came down and tried to tell my story. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Matt Taibbi. Always had positive experiences with him. And this is from National Review because he actually dropped a $10 million lawsuit against a Democratic congresswoman for things that she said about him during a congressional hearing. So Matt Taibbi sued Congresswoman Sydney Kamlager Dove. It's hyphenated, but we'll call her Dove because the patriarchy always wins. He sued her in federal court for calling him a, quote, serial sexual harasser during a House Foreign Affairs subcommittee. Taibbi has not been accused of or charged with sexual harassment. So she just took it out of whole cloth. She actually took it from some satirical passage from a book that he wrote. Now, Congresswoman Dove criticized Republicans at the start of the hearing for, quote, elevating a serial sexual harasser as their star witness. And then she went afterwards and started posting things about him, Matt Taibbi, on social media. So he sues her $10 million. And then we get a ruling from federal court where the Department of Justice represented the good Congresswoman Dove. So it's hard to see. I'll pull it down, just kind of get a couple of little excerpts out of it because there's certain elements here. There's a sovereign immunity question. And effectively what the Department of Justice argued successfully to the court is that the United States government could swap itself in for the Congresswoman because she's a federal employee. So now Matt Taibbi is just suing USG, no longer Congresswoman Dove. And then the question is, well, she gets a certain amount of dispensation if she's having conversations on the floor of the House or within committee. It's within the purview of her job. Is that allowable, though? Did she defame Taibbi? And Taibbi said, I don't even care about that. She went on social media afterwards and was saying stuff and was posting videos. So that's ultimately what the court's weighing in on. And that's what the Department of Justice is arguing on behalf of the Congresswoman Dove, saying, nope, nope, she's perfectly allowed to do it. So here's a couple quotes. Taibbi claims the statements were republished to bolster Representative Dove's political standing. Representative Dove's statements and republications, however, are precisely the kind of conduct that is a central part of the job for members of Congress. So calling American journalists serial sexual harassers is actually precisely part of their job. Just besmirching people's reputation in front of a national television audience and then the entire world on the internet. That's par for the course for what Congress people are expected to do. Members of Congress routinely engage with the public on social media and on the internet as part of their jobs. That's correct. But lying, bald-faced lies, I don't think that's in the job description. I don't even think it's in the invisible link and the good and plenty clause in the back of the Declaration of Independence, but I might be wrong. And last, the court held that the statements were within the Congresswoman's scope of employment. So, thank you very much, DOJ. Congresswoman can go out there and defame a reputable journalist who's just busting his hump, trying to get information out to the American people so that they can make informed decisions and not go and vote in a ranked choice voting situation where they wind up electing a communist because, well, that sounds like democracy. It sounds pretty good, but I don't like Jim Jordan, so I won't fill out a ballot. And then it gets exhausted and you actually effectively are disenfranchised. But that congressperson, totally good. Meanwhile, let's go find a retard in New Jersey who won't do anything wrong until we get him to buy a VPN and say that that's providing material support to a terrorist organization that he's never actually been in contact and has no idea that he actually exists. Good for headlines, though, right? Everything's going swimmingly, exactly according to plan, which is how we know that the status quo is undefeated. It's forever, guys. There's just no escaping this thing. And again, we'll have to rinse, wash, and repeat the message. We got to focus down. We got to become ungovernable. We have to make the federal apparatus as irrelevant as possible. Partner with your neighbors and your friends and your families and your churches and your schools and your communities, however you can. Just develop your own virtual Rolodex. Find a fellow intellectual, fellow traveler who's a plumber or an electrician and make sure that you partner with them and you can provide skills to them. They can provide skills to you because we're all sort of masters of one and not really jacks of all trades. Those are the sorts of things that we're going to have to do to make these galactic jerks as irrelevant as possible, to make sure that we have hardened our areas so that an FBI, a Department of Justice, when they're out there trying to find evil to do, they're going to say, they're not so vulnerable there. We'll have to look for greener pastures. All right. So we've reached the end of the American Radicals podcast for today, guys. And is really want to kind of feel good and greener pastures. I mean, they kind of link it here. Father and son moment, dad victory. Son has his first home run in batting practice. So let's smile on our way out the door today on the AMRAD pod. Perfect, man. Just perfect. All right. We'll be back with you tomorrow, noontime Eastern, here on Rumble and on YouTube. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AMRADPod.